Alright, welcome back, sports fans. I think. Yeah, there we go. That seems to be working. I should probably bump up the decibel gain a little because my voice is pretty shot. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of whatever we're calling the show this week. Radio-free book reading, maybe? I don't know. So yeah, more Rise of Endymion by Simmons. So last week was dramatic, or last installment was very dramatic, with our protagonist Raul Endymion facing down the Rhadamanth Nemes creature, and ultimately winning, basically by flinging her off into the sulfuric acid sea of T'ien Shan. He's able to do this because basically her whole time or phase shifting power is locked away by, presumably, by the lions and tigers and bears. Or just Ania. It's hard to be sure. And, yeah. Unfortunately, he's been beaten pretty badly. One of his ears is hanging off, a bunch of his scalp is pretty badly mangled, and so he has to be put into cryogenic fugue, because all the dock-in-the-box slots are taken up by people who are pretty badly injured as well. Federico de Soya, Sergeant Gregorius, and one other person. I can't remember who. Might be one of the other people with de Soya and Gregorius. Anyway, so the ship is now going to attempt to make an escape. Even though the system is filled with like 30-something vessels, Pax vessels, all gunning for it. So, how they're going to manage that is anybody's guess. We'll find out shortly. Just give me a sec here to get some more water in me, and we will continue with Chapter 24 of The Rise of Endymion. "24. Falling. Heart pounding wildly, I awoke in what seemed to be a different universe. I was floating, not falling. At first I thought that I was in an ocean, a salt ocean with a positive buoyancy, floating like a fetus in a sepia-tinged salt sea, but then I realized that there was no gravity at all, no waves or currents, and that the medium was not water, but thick sepia light. The ship? No, I was in a large, empty, darkened but light-circled space. An empty ovoid some 15 meters or more across, with parchment walls through which I could see both the filtered light of a blazing sun and something more complicated, a vast organic structure curving away on all sides. I weakly moved my hands from their floating position to touch my face, head, body, and arms. I was floating, tethered by only the lightest harness straps to some sort of stick-tight strip on the curved inner wall. I was barefoot and wearing only a soft cotton tunic that I did not recognize. Pajamas? Hospital gown? My face was tender, and I could feel new ridges that might be scars. My hair was gone, the flesh above my skull was raw and definitely scarred, and my ear was there but very tender. My arms had several faint scars that I could see in the dim light. I pulled up my trouser leg and looked at what had been a badly broken lower leg, healed and firm. I felt my ribs, tender but intact. I had made it to the dock in the box after all. I must have spoken aloud, for a dark figure floating nearby said,
"Eventually you did, Raul, Endymion, but some of the surgery was done the old-fashioned way, and by me."
I started, floating up against the stick-tight strips. It had not been Aenea's voice. The dark form floated closer, and I recognized the shape, the hair, and, finally, the voice. "Rachel," I said. My tongue was dry, my lips cracked. I croaked the word rather than spoke it. Rachel came closer and offered me a squeeze bottle. The first few drops came out as tumbling spheres, most of which splashed me on the face, but I soon got the knack of it and squeezed drops into my open mouth. The water tasted cool and wonderful.
"You've been getting liquids and sustenance via IV for 2 weeks," said Rachel, "but it's better if you drink directly."
2 weeks, I said. I looked around. Aenea? Are they?
"Everyone's all right," said Rachel. "Aenea's busy. She's spent much of the last couple weeks in here with you, watching over you. But when she had to go out with Minmun and the others, she had me stay with you."
"Minmun?" I said. I peered through the translucent wall. One bright star, smaller than Hyperion's sun. The incredible geometries of the structure spreading away, curving out from this ovoid room. "Where am I?" I said. "How did we get here?" Rachel chuckled.
"I'll answer the second question first. Let you see the answer to the first yourself in a few minutes. Aenea had the ship jump to this place. Father Captain de Soya, his Sergeant Gregorius, and the officer, T'ien Shan, knew the coordinates for this star system. They were all unconscious, but the other survivor, their former prisoner, Hogue Liebler, knew where this place was hiding." I looked through the wall again. The structure seemed huge. A light and shadow latticework stretching out in all directions from this pod. How could they hide something this large? And who hid it? "How did we get to a translation point in time?" I croaked, taking a few more globules of water. "I thought the Pax warships were closing in." "They were," said Rachel. "They did. We could never have gotten to a Hawking Drive translation point before they destroyed us. Here, you don't need to be stuck to the wall any longer."
She ripped off the stick-tight strips, and I floated free. Even in 0G, I felt very weak. Orienting myself so that I could still see Rachel's face in the dim sepia light, I said, "So, how did we do it?"
"We didn't translate," said the young woman. "Aenea directed the ship to a point in space where we farcasted directly into this system."
Farcast? There was an active space farcast portal? Like one of the kinds that the hegemony force ships used to transit? I didn't think that any of those had survived the fall. And Rachel was shaking her head.
"There was no Farcaster portal. Nothing. Just an arbitrary point a few 100,000 clicks from the second moon. It was quite a chase. The Pax ships kept hailing us and threatening to fire. Finally, they did. Lance beams leaping toward us from a dozen sources. We wouldn't even have been a debris field, just gas on a widening trajectory. But then we reached the point Aenea had pointed us toward, and suddenly we were here." I did not say, "Where is here?" again, but I floated to the curved wall and tried to peer through it. The wall felt warm, spongy, organic, and it was filtering most of the sunlight.
The resulting interior light was soft and beautiful, but it made it difficult to see out. Just the one blazing star was visible, and the hint of that incredible geometric structure beyond our pod.
"Ready to see the where?" said Rachel.
"Yeah."
"Pod," said Rachel. "Transparent surface, please."
Suddenly, there was nothing separating us from the outside. I almost shouted in terror. Instead, I flailed my arms and legs trying to find a solid surface to cling to until Rachel kicked closer and steadied me with a firm hand. We were in space. The surrounding pod had simply disappeared. We were floating in space, seemed to be floating in space except for the presence of air to breathe, and we were far out on a branch of a... Tree is not the right word. I had seen trees. This was not a tree. I had heard much about the old Templar world trees, had seen the stump of the world tree on God's Grove, and I'd heard about the kilometers-long ship trees that had traveled between the star systems back in Martin Silenus's pilgrim days. This was not a world tree or a ship tree. I had heard wild legends, from Ania actually, so they were probably not legends, of a tree ring around a star, a fantastical braided ring of living material stretching all the way around an old Earth system like Sun. I had once tried to calculate how much living material that would require, and decided that it had to be nonsense. This was no tree ring. What stretched out on every side of me, curving inward across expanses too large for my planet-formed mind to take in, was a branched and interwoven sphere of living plant material. Trunks tens or hundreds of kilometers across, branches clicks wide, leaves hundreds of meters across, trailing root systems stretching like God's synapses for thousands of kilometers into space, trellised and wrapped branches stretching out and inward in all directions, trunks the length of old Earth's Mississippi River looking like tiny twigs in the distance, tree shapes the size of my home continent of Aquila on Hyperion, blending into thousands of other clumps and masses of greenery, all bending inward and away on all sides in every direction. There were many black gaps, holes into space, some gaps larger than the trunks and greenery lacing through them. But nowhere were the gaps complete. Everywhere the trunks and branches and roots intertwined, opening uncounted billions of green leaves to the star, blazing away in the locus of vacuum at the center of... I closed my eyes. "This can't be real," I said.
"It is,"
said Rachel.
"The ousters?"
I said.
"Yes,"
said Aenea's friend, the child of the Cantos.
"And the Templars, and the Ergs, and others.
It's alive, but a construct, a minded thing."
"Impossible," I said. "It would take millions of years to grow this sphere."
"Biosphere," said Rachel, smiling. I shook my head again. Biosphere is an old term. It's just the closed vivisystem on and around a planet.
"This is a biosphere," Rachel said again. "Only there are no planets here. Comets, yes, but no planets."
She pointed. In the far distance, perhaps hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, where the interior of this living sphere began to fade to a green blur, even in the unblinking vacuum, a long white streak moved slowly through the black gap between trunks. "A comet," I repeated stupidly.
"For watering," said Rachel. "They have to use millions of them. Luckily, there are many billions in the Oort cloud, more billions in the Kuiper belt."
I stared. There were other white specks out there, each with a long, glowing tail. Some moved between the trunks and branches as I watched, giving me some idea of the scale of this biosphere.
"The comet trajectories were routed through the gaps in the plant material. If this truly is a sphere, the comets would have to pass back through the living globe on their way out system. What kind of confidence does it take to do such a thing?"
"What is this thing we're in?" I said.
An environmental pod, said Rachel, like life bulb. This one is tailored for medical duty. It's not only been monitoring your IV drip, vital signs, and tissue regeneration, it's been growing and manufacturing many of the medicines and other chemicals. I reached out and touched the nearly transparent material. How thick is it? About 1 millimeter, said Rachel, but very strong. It can shield us from most micrometeorite impacts. Where do the ousters get such a material? They biofacture the genes and it grows itself, said Rachel. Do you feel up to going out to see Aeneas and meeting some people? Everyone's been waiting for your awakening. Yes, I said, and then, quickly, no, Rachel? She floated there, waiting. I saw how lustrous her dark eyes were in the amazing light, much like my darling's. Rachel, I began awkwardly. She waited, floating, reaching out to touch the transparent pod wall to orient herself head up in relation to me. Rachel, we haven't really talked much. You didn't like me, said the young woman with a slight smile. That's not true. I mean, it was true, in a way, but it's because I just didn't understand things at first. It had been 5 years for Aeneas that I'd been away. It was difficult. I guess I was jealous. She arched a dark eyebrow. Jealous how, Raul? Did you think that Aeneas and I were lovers all those standard years you were gone? Well, no. I mean, I didn't know. Rachel held up a hand, sparing me further flummoxing. We aren't, she said. We never were. Aeneas would never have considered such a thing. Theo might have entertained the possibility, but she knew from the start that Aeneas and I were destined to love certain men. I stared. Destined? Rachel smiled again. I could imagine that grin on the little girl Saul Weintraub had talked about in his Hyperion cantos. Don't worry, Raul. I happen to know for a fact that Aeneas has never loved anyone but you, even when she was a little girl, even before she met you. You've always been her chosen one. The young woman's smile became rueful. We should all be so lucky. I started to speak, hesitated. Rachel's smile faded. Oh, she told you about the 1 year, 11 month, 1 week, 6 hour interregnum? Yes, I said. About her having... I stopped. It would be foolish to choke up in front of this strong woman. She would never look at me the same again. A baby? Finished Rachel quickly. I looked at her as if trying to find some answer in her handsome features. Did Aeneas tell you about it? I said, feeling like I was betraying my dear friend somewhat by trying to get this information from someone else. But I could not stop. Do you know at the time where she was? Said Rachel, returning my intense gaze. What was happening to her? That she was getting married? I could only nod. Yes, said Rachel. We knew. Were you there with her? Rachel seemed to hesitate, as if weighing her answer. No, she said at last. Abetic, Theo, and I waited for almost 2 years for her to return. We carried on her mission? Whatever it is, we carried it on while she was gone, sharing some of her lessons, finding people who wished to partake of communion, letting them know when she would return. So you knew when she would return? Yes, said Rachel, to the day. How? That's when she had to return, said the dark-haired woman. She had taken every possible minute that she could without jeopardizing her mission. The Pax was hunting for us the next day. They would have seized all of us if Aeneas had not returned and farcast us away. I nodded, but was not thinking about close calls with the Pax. Did you meet... him? I said, trying unsuccessfully to keep my tone neutral. Rachel's expression remained serious. Father to their child, you mean? Aeneas' husband? I felt that Rachel was not trying to be cruel, but the words tore at me far worse than had Nemes's claws. Yes, I said. Him. Rachel shook her head. None of us had met him when she went away.
But you do know why she chose him to be the father of her child? I persisted, feeling like the Grand Inquisitor we had left behind on T'ien Shan.
Yes,
said Rachel, returning my gaze, giving me no more. Was it something to do with her mission? I said, feeling my throat growing tighter and tighter, my voice more strained. Is it something she had to do? Some reason the child had to be born to them? Can you tell me anything, Rachel? She took my wrist then, gripping it strongly.
Raul, you know that Ania will explain this when it's time to do so.
I pulled away, making a rude noise. When it's time, I growled. Jesus H. Christ, I'm sick of hearing that phrase, and I'm sick of waiting.
Rachel shrugged. Confront her, then. Threaten to beat her up if she doesn't tell you. You clobbered that Nemes thing. Ania shouldn't be a problem.
I glowered at the woman.
Seriously, Raul, this is between you and Ania. All I can tell you is that you are the only man she has ever talked about, and, as far as I can tell, the only man she has ever loved.
How the hell can you... I began angrily, and then forced myself to shut up. I patted her arm awkwardly, the motion making me begin to pivot up around the center of my own axis. It was hard to stay near someone in 0G without touching them. Thank you, Rachel, I said.
Ready to go see everyone?
I took a breath. Almost, I said. Can this pod surface be made reflective?
Pod, said Rachel, 90% translucence. High interior reflectivity.
To me, she said,
checking in the mirror before your big date?
The surface had become about as reflective as a still puddle of water. Not a perfect mirror, but clear enough and bright enough to show me a Raul Endymion with scars on his face and a bare scalp, the skin on his skull a babyish pink, traces of bruise and swelling under and around his eyes, and thin, very thin. The bones and muscles of my face and upper body seemed to have been sketched in bold pencil strokes. My eyes looked different.
Jesus H. Christ,
I said again. Rachel made a motion with her hand.
The autosurgeon wanted you for another week, but Ania couldn't wait. The scars aren't permanent, at least most of them. The pod medicine in the IV is taking care of the regeneration. Your hair will start growing back in 2 or 3 standard weeks.
I touched my scalp. It was like patting the scarred and especially tender butt of an ugly newborn. 2 or 3 weeks, I said. Great. Fucking great.
Don't sweat it, said Rachel. I think it looks rather dashing, actually. I'd keep that look if I were you, Raul. Besides, I hear that Ania is a pushover for older men. And right now, you certainly look older.
Thanks, I said dryly.
You're welcome, said Rachel. Pod, open iris. Access to main pressurized stem connector.
She led the way out, kicking and floating ahead of me through the irising wall. Ania hugged me so hard when I came into the room, pod, that I wondered if my broken ribs might have given way again. I hugged her back just as hard. The trip through the pressurized stem connector had been commonplace enough, if one counted being shot down a flexible, translucent 2-meter-wide pipeline at speeds up to what I estimated as 60 clicks per hour. They used currents of oxygen flowing at high speeds in opposite directions to give a boost to one's kicking and swimming through air. All the while, other people, mostly very thin, hairless, and exceptionally tall other people, whizzed by silently in the opposite direction at closing speeds in excess of 120 clicks per hour, missing us by centimeters. Then there were the hub pods, into which Rachel and I were accelerated at high speed, like corpuscles being blasted into ventricles and auricles of a huge heart, and through which we tumbled, kicked, avoided other high-speed travelers, and exited via one of a dozen of other stem connector openings. I was lost within minutes, but Rachel seemed to know her way. She pointed. Oh, that I skipped a line. She pointed out that there were subtle colors embedded in the plant flesh over each exit, and soon we had entered a pod not much larger than mine, but crowded with cubbies, stick-tight seating areas, and people. Some of the people, like Ania, Abetic, Theo, the Dorje Famo, and Lomo Dondrub, I knew well. Other people there, Father Captain de Soya, obviously renewed and recovered from his terrible wounds and wearing a priest's black trousers, tunic, and Roman collar, Sergeant Gregorius in his Swiss Guard combat fatigues, I had met recently and knew by sight. Other people, like the long, thin, otherworldly ousters and the hooded Templars, were wondrous and strange, but well within my range of understanding, while still other individuals there, quickly introduced by Ania as the Templar true voice of the tree Het Mastine and the former Hegemony Force Colonel Thedman Kassad, I knew of but did not actually believe I was meeting. More than Rachel or the fact of Ania's mother, Braun Lamia, these were figures not just from the old poet's cantos, but archetypes from deep myth, long dead at the very least, and probably never real to begin with in the fixed, everyday, eat, sleep, and use the toilet firmament of things. And finally, in this zero-gravity ouster pod, there were other people who were not people at all, at least from my frame of reference, such as the willowy green beings who were introduced by Ania as Liurn and Uiol, two of the few surviving Seneshai empaths from Hebron, alien and intelligent beings. I looked at these strange creatures, the palest cypress-green skin and eyes, bodies so thin that I could have encircled their torso with my fingers, symmetrical like us with 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but, of course, not really like us at all, limbs articulated more like single unbroken fluid lines than evolved of hinged bone and gristle, splayed digits like toads' hands, and heads more like a human fetus's than a human adult's. Their eyes were little more than shadowy spots on the green flesh of their faces. The Seneshai had been reported to have died out during the early days of the Hegira. They were little more than legend, even less real than the tale of the soldier Kassad or the Templar Het Mastine. One of these 3 legends brushed its 3-fingered hand over my palm as we were introduced. One of these green legends brushed its 3-fingered hand over my palm as we were introduced. There were other non-human, non-ouster, non-android entities in the pod. Floating near the translucent wall of the pod were what looked to be large greenish-white platelets, soft, shuddering saucers of soft material, each almost 2 meters across. I had seen these life forms before, on the cloud world where I had been eaten by the sky squid.
"Not eaten, Endymion," came surges of language echoing in my head. "Only transported."
Telepathy? I thought, half directing the query to the platelets. I remembered the surge of language thought on the cloud world, and how I had wondered where it had originated. It was Ania who answered.
"It feels like telepathy," she said softly, "but there's nothing mystical about it. The Akaratali learned our language the old-fashioned way. Their Zeppelin symbiotes heard the sound vibrations, and the Akaratali broke it down and analyzed it. They control the Zeppelins by a form of long-distance, very tightly focused microwave pulses."
"The Zeppelin was the thing that swallowed me on the cloud world," I said.
"Yes," said Ania.
"Like the Zeppelins on Whirl?"
"Yes, and in Jupiter's atmosphere as well."
I thought they were hunted to extinction during the early Hegira years."
"They were eradicated on Whirl," said Ania, "and even before the Hegira on Jupiter. But you weren't paragliding your kayak on Jupiter or Whirl, but on another oxygen-rich gas giant 600 light-years into the outback."
I nodded. "I'm sorry I interrupted. You were saying Microwave impulses. Ania made that graceful throwing-away gesture I'd known since she was a child. Just that they control their Zeppelin symbiote partner's actions by precise microwave Just that they control their Zeppelin symbiote's partner's actions by precise microwave stimulation of certain nerve and brain centers. We've given the Acaratali permission to stimulate our speech centers so that we hear their messages. I take it that it's rather like playing a complicated piano for them. I nodded, but did not really understand.
The Acaratali are also a spacefaring race, said Father Captain DeSoya. Over the eons, they have colonized more than 10,000 oxygen-rich gas-giant worlds.
10,000, I said. I think that for a moment my jaw actually hung slack. In humankind's more than 1,200 years of traveling in space, we had explored and settled on less than 10% of that number of planets.
The Acaratali have been at it longer than us. The Acaratali have been at it longer than we, said DeSoya softly.
I looked at the gently vibrating platelets. They had no eyes that I could see, certainly no ears. Were they hearing us? They must. One of them had responded to my thoughts. Could they read minds as well as stimulate language thoughts? While I was staring at them, the conversation between the humans and ousters in the room resumed.
The intelligence is reliable, said the pale ouster, whom I later learned was named Navsun Hamnim. There were at least 300 Archangel-class ships gathering at System Lakai 9352. Each ship has a representative of the Order of the Knights of Jerusalem or Malta. It is definitely a major crusade.
Lakai 9352, mused DeSoya. Sibiatu's bitterness. I know the place. How old is this intelligence?
20 hours, said Navsum Hamnim. The data was sent via the only Gideon Drive courier drone we have left. Of the 3 drones captured during your raids, 2 have been destroyed. We are fairly sure that the scout ship which sent this drone was detected and destroyed seconds after launching the courier.
300 Archangels, said DeSoya. He rubbed his cheeks. If they are aware that we know about them, they could make a Gideon jump this direction within days. Hours. Assume 2 days resurrection time, we may have less than 3 days to prepare. Have defenses been improved since I left? Another ouster, whom I later knew as Sistenge Cordwell, opened his hands in a gesture that I would discover meant in no way. I noticed that there was webbing between the long fingers.
Most of the fighting ships have had to jump into the Great Wall salient to hold off their task force Horsehead. The fighting is very bitter there. Few of the ships are expected to return.
Does your intelligence say whether the Pax knows what you have here? Asked Ania. Navsun Hamnim opened his hands in a subtle variation of Cordwell's gesture.
We think not, but they know that this has been a major staging area for our recent defensive battles. I would venture that they think this is just another base, perhaps with a partial orbiting forest ring.
Is there anything we can do to break up the crusade before it jumps this way? Said Ania, speaking to everyone in the room. No. The flat syllable came from the tall man who had been introduced as Colonel Fedman Kassad. His web English had a strange accent. He was a tall man, extremely thin but muscular, with an equally thin beard along his jawline and around his mouth. In the old poet's cantos, Kassad had been described as a reasonably young man, but this warrior was in his standard 60s at least, with heavy lines around his thin mouth and small eyes, his dark complexion burned even darker by long exposure to desert world sun or deep space UV, the spiked hair on top of his head rising like short silver nails. Everyone looked at Kassad and waited.
With DeSoya's ship destroyed, said the colonel, our only chance at successful hit-and-run operations is gone. The few Hawking Drive warships we have left would take a time debt of at least 2 months to jump to Lakai 9352 and back. The Crusade archangels would almost certainly be here and gone by then, and we would be defenseless.
Navsun Hamnim, I'm going to struggle with that all the time. Navsun Hamnim kicked away from the pod wall and oriented himself right side up in relation to Kassad. These few warships do not offer us a defense in any case, he said softly, his own web English more musical than accented. Should we not consider dying while on the attack? Ania floated between the two men. I think that we should consider not dying at all, she said, nor allowing the biosphere to be destroyed. A positive sentiment, his voice spoke in my head, but not all positive sentiments can be supported by updrafts of possible action. True, said Ania, looking at the platelets, but perhaps in this case the updrafts will build. Good thermals to you all, said the voice in my head. The platelets moved toward the pod wall, which Iris opened for them. Then they were gone. Ania took a breath. Shall we meet on the Yggdrasil to share the main meal in 7 hours and continue this discussion? Perhaps someone will have an idea. There was no dissension. People, ousters, and seneschai exited by a score of openings that had not been there a moment before. Ania floated over and hugged me again. I patted her hair. My friend, she said softly, come with me. It was her private living pod. Our private living pod, she informed me, and it was much like the one in which I awoke, except that there were organic shelves, niches, writing surfaces, storage cubbies, and facilities for comlog interface. Some of my clothes from the ship were folded neatly in a cubby, and my extra boots were in a fiberplastic drawer. Ania pulled food from a cold box cubby and began making sandwiches. You must be hungry, my dear, she said, tearing off pieces of rough bread. I saw zygote cheese on the stick-tight 0G work surface, some wrapped pieces of roast beef that must have come from the ship, bulbs of mustard, and several tankards of T'ien Shan rice beer. Suddenly, I was starved. The sandwiches were large and thick. She set them on catch plates made of some strong fiber, lifted her own meal and a beer bulb, and kicked toward the outer wall. A portal appeared and began to iris open. I said alertly, meaning, excuse me, Ania, but that's space out there. Aren't we both going to explosively decompress and die horribly? She kicked out through the organic portal, and I shrugged and followed. There were catwalks, suspension bridges, stick-tight stairways, balconies, and terraces out there, made of steel-hard plant fiber and winding around the pods, stalks, branches, and trunks like so much ivy. There was also air to breathe. It smelled of a forest after rain. Containment field, I said, thinking that I should have expected this. After all, if the Consul's ancient starship could have a balcony... I looked around. What powers it? I said. Solar receptors? Indirectly, said Ania, finding us a stick-tight bench and mat. There were no railings on this tiny, intricately woven balcony. The huge branch, at least 30 meters across, ended in a profusion of leaves above us, and the latticework web of the trunks and branches beneath, in quotes, us, convinced my inner ear that we were many kilometers up on a wall made of crisscrossed green girders. I resisted the urge to throw myself down on the stick-tight mat and cling for dear life. A radiant gossamer fluttered by, followed by some type of small bird with a V-shaped tail. Indirectly? Indirectly? I said, my mouth full as I took a huge bite of sandwich. The sunlight, for the most part, is converted to containment fields by ergs, continued my friend, sipping her beer and looking out at the seemingly infinite expanse of leaves above us, below us, to all sides of us, their green faces all turned toward the brilliant star.
There was not enough air to give us a blue sky, but the containment field polarized the view toward the sun just enough to keep us from being blinded when we glanced in that direction. I almost spat my food out, managed to swallow instead, and said, "Ergs? As in Aldebaran energy binders? You were serious? Ergs like the one taken on the last Hyperion pilgrimage?" "Yes," said Aeneas. Her dark eyes were focused on me now. "I thought they were extinct." "Nope," said Aeneas. I took a long drink from the beer bulb and shook my head. "I'm confused." "You have a right to be, my dear friend," Aeneas said softly. "This place." I made a weak gesture toward the wall of branches and leaves trailing away so much farther than a planetary horizon, the infinitely distant curve of green and black far above us. "It's impossible," I said. "Not quite," said Aeneas. "The Templars and Ousters have been working on it, and others like it, for 1,000 years. I began chewing again. The cheese and roast beef were delicious. So this is where the thousands and millions of trees went when they abandoned God's Grove during the fall." "Some of them," said Aeneas, "but the Templars had been working with the Ousters to develop orbital forest rings and biospheres long before that." I peered up. The distances made me dizzy. The sense of being on this small, leafy platform so many kilometers above nothing made me reel. Far below us and to our right, something that looked like a tiny green sprig moved slowly between the latticed branches. I saw the film of energy field around it and realized that I was looking at one of the fabled Templar tree ships, almost certainly kilometers long. "Is this finished, then?" I said. "A true Dyson sphere? A globe around a star?" Aeneas shook her head. "Far from it, although about 20 standard years ago they made contact with all the primary trunk tendrils. Technically it's a sphere, but most of it is comprised of holes at this point, some many millions of clicks across." "Fan-fucking-tastic," I said, realizing that I could have been more eloquent. I rubbed my cheeks, feeling the heavy growth of beard there. "I've been out of it for 2 weeks," I said. 15 standard days," said Aeneas. "Usually the dock in the box works more quickly than that," I said. I finished the sandwich, stuck the catch plate to the table surface, and concentrated on the beer. "Usually it does," agreed Aeneas. "Rachel must have told you that you spent a relatively short time in the autosurgeon. She did most of the initial surgery herself." "Why?" I said. "The box was full," said Aeneas. "We defrosted you from fugue as soon as we got here, but the 3 in the dock ahead of you were in bad shape. DeSoya was near death for a full week. The sergeant, Gregorius, was much more seriously injured than he had let on when we met him on the Great Peak, and the 3rd officer, T'ien Shan, died despite the boxes and the Ouster medic's best efforts." "Shit," I said, lowering my beer. "Sorry to hear that." One got used to autosurgeons fixing almost anything. Aeneas looked at me with such intensity that I could feel her gaze warming my skin as surely as I could feel the powerful sunlight. "How are you, Raul?" "Great," I said. "I ache a bit. I can feel the healing ribs. The scars itch. And I feel like I overslept by 2 weeks. But I feel good." She took my hand. I realized that her eyes were moist. "I would have been really pissed if you died on me," she said after a moment, her voice thick. "Me too." I squeezed her hand, looked up, and suddenly leaped to my feet, sending the beer bulb spiraling off into thin air and almost launching myself. Only the stick-tight Velcro soles of my soft shoes kept me anchored. "Holy shit!" I said, pointing. From this distance, it looked like a squid, perhaps only a meter or 2 long. From experience and a growing sense of perspective here, I knew better. "One of the Zeppelins," said Aeneas. "The Acrotali have tens of thousands working on the biosphere. They stay inside the CO2 and O2 envelopes." "It's not going to eat me again, is it?" I said.
Ania grinned. I doubt it. The one that got a taste of you has probably spread the word. I looked for my beer, saw the bulb tumbling away 100 meters below us, considered leaping after it, thought better of it, and sat down on the stick-tight bench. Ania gave me her bulb. Go ahead. I can never finish those things. She watched me drink. Any other questions while we're talking? I swallowed and made a dismissive gesture. Well, there happens to be a bunch of extinct, mythical, and dead people around. Care to explain that? By extinct, you mean the Zeppelins, Seneschai, and Templars? She said. Yeah, and the Ergs, although I haven't seen one of those yet. The Templars and Ousters have been working to preserve the Templars and Ousters have been working to preserve such hunted sentient species the way the colonists on Maui Covenant tried to save the old Earth dolphins, she said. From the early Hedgera colonists, then the hegemony, and now the Pax. And the mythical and dead people? I said. By that you mean Colonel Cassad? And Het Mastine, I said. And for that matter, Rachel. We seem to have the whole cast of the friggin' Hyperion cantos showing up here. Not quite, said Ania, her voice soft and a bit sad. The Consul is dead. Father de Rey is never allowed to live, and my mother is gone. Sorry, kiddo. She touched my hand again. That's all right. I know what you mean. It's disconcerting. Did you know Colonel Cassad or Het Mastine before this? I said. Ania shook her head. My mother told me about them, of course, and Uncle Martin had things to add to his poem's description, but they were gone before I was born. Gone, I said. I repeated. Don't you mean dead? I worked to remember the canto's stanzas. According to the old poet's tale, Het Mastine, the tall Templar, the true voice of the tree, had disappeared on the wind-wagon trip across Hyperion's sea of grass shortly after his tree ship, the Yggdrasil, had burned in orbit. Blood in the Templar's cabin suggested the Shrike. He had left behind the Erg in a Mobius cube. Some time later, they had found Mastine in the Valley of the Time Tombs. He had not been able to explain his absence, had said only that the blood in the wind wagon had not been his, had cried out that it was his job to be the voice of the tree of pain, and had died. Colonel Cassad had disappeared at about that same time, shortly after entering the Valley of the Time Tombs. But the Force Colonel had, according to Martin Silenus's cantos, followed his phantom lover, Moneta, into the far future where he was to die in combat with the Shrike. I closed my eyes and recited aloud. Later, in the death carnage of the valley, Moneta and a few of the chosen warriors, wounded all, torn and tossed themselves by the Shrike horde's fury, found the body of Fedman Cassad, still wrapped in death's embrace with the silent Shrike. Lifting the warrior, carrying him, touching him with reverence born of loss and battle, they washed and tended his ravaged body, and bore him to the crystal monolith. Here the hero was laid on a bier of white marble. Weapons were set at his feet. In the valley beyond, a great bonfire filled the air with light. Human men and women carried torches through the dark, while others descended wing-soft through morning lapis lazuli, and some others arrived in fairy craft, bubbles of light, while still others descended on wings of energy, or wrapped in circles of green and gold. Later, as the stars burned in place, Moneta made her farewells to her future's friends, and entered the Sphinx. Multitudes sang, rat things poked among fallen pennants in the field where heroes fell, while the wind whispered among carapace and blade and steel and thorn. And thus, in the valley, the great tombs shimmered, faded from gold to bronze, and started their long voyage back. Impressive memory, said Ania. Grandam used to cuff me if I screwed it up, I said. Don't change the subject. The Templar and the Colonel sound dead to me. And so they will be, said Ania, and so shall we all. I waited for her to shift out of her Delphic phase. The Cantos say that Headmaster Steen was carried away somewhere, somewhen, by the Shrike, she said. He later died in the Valley of the Time Tombs after returning. The poem did not say if he was gone an hour or 30 years. Uncle Martin did not know.
I squinted at her. What about Cassad, kiddo? The Cantos are fairly specific there. The Colonel follows Moneta into the far future, engages in battle with the Shrike,
With legions of Shrikes, actually,
corrected my friend. Yeah, I said. I had never really understood that. But it seems continuous enough. He follows her, he fights, he dies, his body is put in the crystal monolith, and it and Moneta begin the long trip back through time. Ania nodded and smiled.
With the Shrike,
she said. I paused. The Shrike had emerged from the tombs. Moneta had traveled with it somehow, so although the Cantos clearly said that Cassad had destroyed the Shrike in that great final battle, the monster was somehow alive and traveling with Moneta and Cassad's body back through. Damn, did the poem ever actually say that Cassad was dead?
Uncle Martin had to fake parts of the tale, you know, said Ania. He had some descriptions from Rachel, but he took poetic license on the parts he did not understand.
Uh-huh, I said. Rachel. Moneta. The Cantos had clearly suggested that the girl child, Rachel, who went forward with her father, Saul, to the future, would return as the woman Moneta. Colonel Cassad's phantom lover. The woman he would follow into the future to his fate. And what had Rachel said to me a few hours earlier when I was suspicious that she and Ania were lovers?
I happen to be involved with a certain soldier, male, whom you'll meet today. Well, actually, I will be involved with him someday. I mean, shit, it's complicated.
Indeed. My head hurt. I set down the beer bulb and held my head in my hands.
It's more complicated than that, said Ania.
I peered up at her through my fingers. Care to explain?
Yes, but...
I know, I said. At some other time.
Yes, said Ania, her hand on mine.
Any reason why we can't talk about it now? I said.
Ania nodded. We have to go in our pod now and opaque the walls, she said.
We do? I said.
Yes.
And then what? I said.
Then,
said Ania, floating free of the stick-tight mat and pulling me with her,
we make love for hours.
$25. 0G. Weightlessness. I had never really appreciated those terms and that reality before. Our living pod was opaqued to the point that the rich evening light glowed as if through thick parchment. Once again, I had the impression of being in a warm heart. Once again, I realized how much Ania was in my heart. At first, the encounter bordered on the clinical, as Ania carefully removed my clothes and inspected the healing surgical scars, gently touched my repaired ribs, and ran her palm down my back. I should shave, I said, and shower.
Nonsense, whispered my friend. I've given you sponge and tonic baths every day, including this morning. You're perfectly clean, my dear, and I like the whiskers.
She moved her fingers across my cheek. We floated above the soft and rounded cubby shelves. I helped Ania out of her shirt, trousers, and underwear. As each piece came clear, she kicked it through the air into the cubby drawer, shutting the fiber panel with her bare foot when everything was inside. We both chuckled. My own clothes were still floating in the quiet air, the sleeves of my shirt gesturing in slow motion. "I'll get the—" I began.
"No, you won't," said Ania, and pulled me closer.
Even kissing demands new skills in zero-G. Ania's hair coiled around her head in a sunlit corona as I held her face in my hands and kissed her. Her lips, eyes, cheeks, forehead, and lips again. We began tumbling slowly, brushing the smooth and glowing wall. It was as warm as my dear friend's flesh. One of us pushed off, and we tumbled together into the middle of the oval pod space. Our kissing became more urgent. Each time we moved to hold the other more tightly, we would begin to pivot around an invisible center of mass, arms and legs entangled as we pressed tighter and rotated more quickly. Without disentangling or interrupting our kiss, I held out one arm, waited for the flesh-warm walls to reach us, and stopped our tumble. The contact pushed us away from the curved, warmly glowing wall and sent us spinning very slowly toward the center again. Ania broke our kiss and moved her head back a moment, still holding my arms, regarding me from arm's length. I had seen her smile 10,000 times in the last 10 years of her life, had thought that I knew all of her smiles, but this one was deeper, older, more mysterious, and more mischievous than any I had seen before. "Don't move," she whispered, and, pushing softly against my arm for leverage, rotated in space. "Ania," was all I could say, and then I could say nothing. I closed my eyes, oblivious of everything except sensation. I could feel my darling's hands tight on the backs of my legs, pulling me closer to her. After a moment, her knees came to rest against my shoulders, her thighs bumping softly against my chest. I reached out to the hollow of her back and pulled her closer, sliding my cheek along the strong muscle of her inner thigh. At Taliesin West, one of the cooks had owned a tabby cat. Many evenings, when I was sitting alone out on the western terrace, watching the sunset and feeling the stones lose their day's heat, waiting for the hour when Ania and I could sit in her shelter and talk about everything and nothing, I would watch the cat lap slowly from her bowl of cream. I visualized that cat now, but within minutes I could visualize nothing but the immediate and overpowering sense of my dear friend opening to me, of the subtle taste of the sea, of our movements like the tide rising, of all of my senses being centered in the slow but growing sensation at the core of me. How long we floated this way, I have no idea. Such overwhelming excitement is like a fire that consumes time. Total intimacy is an exemption from the space-time demands of the universe. Only the growing prerogatives of our passion and the ineluctable need to be even closer than this penultimate closeness marked the minutes of our lovemaking. Ania opened her legs wider, moved away, released me with her mouth but not her hand. We pivoted again in the sepia light, her tight fingers and my excitement the center of our slow rotation. We kissed, lips moist, Ania's grasp tightening around me. "Now," she whispered. I obeyed. If there is a true secret to the universe, it is this: these first few seconds of warmth and entry and complete acceptance by one's beloved. We kissed again, oblivious of our slow tumbling, the rich light taking on a heart warmth around us. I opened my eyes long enough to see Ania's hair swirling like Ophelia's cloak in the wine-dark sea of air in which we floated. It was indeed like holding my beloved in deep, salty water, buoyed up and weightless, the warmth of her around me like the rising tide, our movements as regular as the surf against warm sand. "Oops," whispered Ania after only a moment of this perfection. I paused in my kissing long enough to assess what was separating us. "Newton's law," I whispered against her cheek. "For every action," whispered Ania, chuckling softly, holding my shoulders like a swimmer pausing to rest, "an equal and opposite reaction," I said, smiling until she kissed me again. "Solution," whispered Ania. Her legs closed tight around my hips. Her breasts floated between us, the nipples teasing my chest. Then she lay back, again the swimmer, floating this time, her arms spread but her fingers still interlaced with mine.
We continued to pivot slowly around our common center of gravity, a slow tumble, my head coming over and down and around like a rider on a porpoise, doing slow cartwheels in the sunlit depths. But I was no longer interested or aware of the elegant ballistics of our love-making, but only in the love-making. We moved faster in the warm sea of air. Some minutes later, Ania released my hands, moved upright and forward as we tumbled together, still moving, sank her short nails into my back even while she kissed me with a wild urgency, and then moved her mouth away to gasp and cry out, once, softly. At the same instant as her cry, I felt the warm universe of her close around me with that short, tight throb, that intimate, shared pulse. A second later, it was my turn to gasp, to cling to her as I throbbed within her, to whisper into her salty neck and floating hair, "Ania, Ania." A prayer. My only prayer then. My only prayer now. For a long time we floated together, even after we had become two people again rather than one. Our legs were still intertwined, our fingers stroking and holding one another. I kissed her throat and felt her pulse like a memory echo against my lips. She ran her fingers through my sweaty hair. I realized that for this moment, nothing in the past mattered. Nothing terrible in the future mattered. What mattered was her skin against me, her hand holding me, the perfume of her hair and skin, and the warmth of her breath against my chest. This was Satori. This was truth. Ania kicked away to the pod cubby just long enough to return with a small, warm, and wet towel. We took turns wiping some of the sweat and slickness from us. My shirt floated by, the empty sleeves attempting to swim in the gentle air currents. Ania laughed and lingered in her washing and drying, the simple act quickly turning into something else. "Oops," said Ania, smiling at me. "How did that happen?" "Newton's law," I said. "That makes sense," she whispered. "Then what would be the reaction if I were to do this?" I think we both were surprised by the instant result of her experiment. "We have hours until we have to meet the others on the tree ship," she said softly. She said something to the living pod, and the curved wall went absolutely transparent. It was as if we were floating among these countless branches and sail-sized leaves, the sun's warmth bathing us one moment and then being submerged in night and stars when we looked out the other side of the clear pod. "Don't worry," said Ania. "We can see out, but the exterior is opaque on the outside. Reflective." "How can you be sure?" I whispered, kissing her neck again, seeking the soft pulse. Ania sighed. "I guess we can't without going out to look in. Sort of a David Hume problem." I tried to remember my philosophy readings at Taliesin, recalled our discussions of Berkeley, Hume, and Kant, and chuckled. "There's another way we can check," I said, rubbing my bare feet along her calves and the backs of her legs. "How's that?" murmured my friend, her eyes closed. "If anyone can see in," I said, floating behind her, rubbing her back without letting her float away, "there's going to be a huge crowd of Ouster angels and Templar tree ships and comet farmers hanging out there in about 30 minutes. "Really?" said Ania, her eyes still closed. "And why is that?" I began to show her. She opened her eyes. "Oh my," she said softly. I was afraid that I was shocking her. "Raul?" she whispered. I said, not stopping what I was doing. I closed my eyes. "Maybe you're right about the pod being reflective on the outside," she whispered, and then sighed again, more deeply this time. I said. She grabbed my ears and floated around, pulled herself closer, and whispered, "Why don't we leave the outside transparent and make the inside walls reflective?" My eyes snapped open. "Just kidding," she whispered, and pushed away from the pod wall, pulling me with her into the central sphere of warm air. The stars blazed around us.
We wore formal black outfits to the dinner party and conference on the Yggdrasil. I was tense with excitement to be aboard one of the legendary tree ships, and it was a bit of an anticlimax when I realized that I had not noticed when we had crossed from the biosphere branches to the tree ship trunk. It was only when hundreds of us were gathered on a series of platforms and opened pods, when the tree ship had actually cast off and moved away from the encircling city-sized leaves, province-sized branches, and continent-sized trunks, that I realized that we were aboard and moving. I dare say that it was an issue of seeing the forest for the trees. Tree for the forest? Whatever. The Yggdrasil must have been a bit more than a kilometer in length, from the narrowed crown of the tree to the resplendent root system of boiling fusion energy at its base. A bit of gravity returned under drive, probably only a few percentage points of microgravity, but it was still disconcerting after so much zero-G. It did help with our orientation, though, the scores of us able to sit at tables and look one another in the eyes rather than float for a polite position. I thought of Ania and our last hours together and blushed at this thought. There were tables and chairs on the multi-tiered platforms, and many who were not seated there thronged on the flimsy suspension bridges that connected platforms to more far-flung branches, or on the helixes of spiral stairways winding up through branches, leaves, and binding the central trunk like vines, or hung from swing vines and leafy bowers. Ania and I were seated at the round central table along with the true voice of the tree, Het Mastine, the ouster leaders, and 20 of other Templars, refugees from T'ien Shan and others. I was on Ania's immediate left. The Templar dignitaries were seated to her right. Even now I can remember the names of most of the others present at the central table. Besides the captain of the tree ship, Het Mastine, there were half a dozen other Templars there, including Ket Rostine, introduced as the true voice of the Star Tree, High Priest of the Muir, and spokesman of the Templar Brotherhood. The dozen ousters at the main table included Sistenge Cordwell and Navsun Hamnim, but there were others who looked little like these tall, thin ouster archetypes. Am Chipetta and Kent Quinkent, 2 shorter, darker ousters, a married couple, I thought, with lively eyes and no webs between their fingers. Sian Quintana Ka'an, a female who was either wearing a resplendent robe of bright feathers or who had been born with them, and her blue-feathered partners Paul Ure and Morgan Bottoms. 2 others better fit the ouster image. Driven. Nikagat and Palu Koror, for they were I don't know why there's a period. So the way it's written, this sentence is as follows. 2 others better fit the ouster image. Hyphen, driven, period. Nikagat and Palu Koror, hyphen, for they were vacuum-adapted and wore their silvery skin suits through the entire banquet. It must be his first name is Driven Nikagat, or maybe it's some other weird flub. Let me briefly skip ahead here and see if they say his name again in a way that makes more sense. I don't know why this edition's all messed up. Part of me wants to get an original printing from before this one. Yeah. Llama. Desoya, Het Mastine. Lots of Het Mastine. Okay, there's Hamnim, Dondrob, Gassad, Dondrob. Give me a minute here. This is a long chapter, and it's done out like, like a script. It's meeting minutes. Okay. I guess I don't have to worry about the name. Two others better fit the ouster image. Driven, Nikagat and Palu Koror, for they were vacuum adapted and wore their silvery skin suits through the entire banquet. There were four of the Hebronese Seneschai Aluit present. Liun and Uior, whom I had met at the earlier gathering, as well as another pair of the willowy green figures introduced by Aeneas as Alui and Nilu. I could only assume that the four were related or marriage-bound in some complex way. The alien Acrotale appeared to be missing until Aeneas pointed to a place far out among the branches where the microgravity was even less, and there, between the gossamers and glowbirds, floated the platelet beings. Even the erg binders who were controlling the tree ship's containment field were present by proxy in the form of the 3 Mobius cubes with translator discs embedded in their black matrices. Father Captain Federico de Soya sat to my left, and his aide, Sergeant Gregorius, sat to the left of him. Next to the sergeant sat Colonel Fedman Kassad in his formal Force black uniform, looking like a hollow from the deep hegemony past. Beyond Kassad sat the Thunderbolt Sow, as upright and proud as the old Force warrior to her right, while next to her, eyes bright and attentive, sat Getswang Ingwang Lobsang Tengin Gyapso Sisun Wangyur Shungpa Mapai Depal Sangpo, the boy Dalai Lama. All of the other refugees from T'ien Shan were somewhere on the dining platform, and I saw Lomo Dondrub, Labsang Samten, George and Jigme, Haruyuki, Kenshiro, Wojtek, Vicky, Kuku, Kei, and others present at the main table. Just beyond the Templars, around the table from us, were Abetic, Rachel, and Theo Bernard. Rachel never took her eyes off Colonel Kassad, except to look at Aeneas when she spoke. It was as if the rest of us were not there. Tiny Templar servants, whom Aeneas whisperingly described as crew clones, served water and stronger drinks for a while. Oh, there's an and there. Tiny Templar servants, whom Aeneas whisperingly described as crew clones, served water and stronger drinks, and for a while there was the usual murmuring and polite pre-dinner conversation. Then there was a silence as thick as prayer. When Ketrostine, the true voice of the Star Tree, stood to speak, everyone else rose as well.
"My friends," said the small hooded figure, "fellow brothers in the Muir, honored ouster allies, sentient sisters and brothers of the ultimate life tree, human refugees from the Pax, and," the true voice of the Star Tree bowed in Aeneas' direction, "the most revered, one who teaches. As most of us gathered here know, what the Shrike Church once called the Days of Atonement, with us now for almost 3 centuries, are almost done. The true voices of the Brotherhood of the Muir have followed the path of both prophecy and conservation, awaiting events as they came to pass, planting seeds as the soil of revelation has proved fertile. In these coming months and years, the future of many races, not just the human race, will be determined. Although there are those among us now who have been granted the gift of being able to glimpse patterns of the future, probabilities tossed like dice on the uneven blanket of space and time, even these gifted ones know that no single future has been preordained for us or our posterity. Events are fluid. The future is like smoke from a burning forest, waiting for the wind of specific events and personal courage to blow the sparks and embers of reality this way or that. This day, on this tree ship, on the reborn and rechristened Yggdrasil, we shall determine our own paths to our own futures. My own prayer to the life force glimpsed by the Muir is not just that the Star Tree biosphere survives, not just that the Brotherhood survives, not just that our ouster brethren survive, not just that our hunted and harried sentient cousins of the Seneschai and Akereteli and the Erg and the Zeppelin survive, not just that the species known as humankind survives, but that our prophecies begin to be realized this day, and that all species of beloved life, humanity no more than the soft-shelled turtle or Mare infinitus lantern mouth, the jumping spider and the Tesla tree, the old earth raccoon and the Maui Covenant Thomas hawk, all species beloved of life join in rebirth of respect as distinct partners in the universe's growing cycle of life.
The true voice of the Star Tree turned to Aeneas and bowed.
Revered one who teaches, we are gathered here today because of you. We know from our prophecies, from those in our brotherhood and elsewhere who have touched the nexus known as the void which binds, that you are the best single hope of reconciliation between humanity and core, between humankind and other kind. We also know that time is short, and that the immediate future holds the potential for both the beginnings of this reconciliation and our liberation, or for near total destruction. Before any decisions can be made, there are those among us who must ask their final questions. Will you join in discussion with us now? Is this the time to speak of those things which must be spoken of and understood before all the worlds and abodes of Auster and Templar and Pax and disparate humankind join in the final battle for humanity's soul?
Said Aeneas. The true voice of the Star Tree sat down. Aeneas stood, waited. I slipped my scriber from my vest pocket. And now it turns into meeting minutes. Or transcription, rather. Auster Sistenge Cordwell.
Aeneas, most respected one who teaches, can you tell us with any certainty whether the biosphere, our Star Tree, will be spared destruction and the Pax assault?
Aeneas. I cannot, Freeman Cordwell, and if I could, it would be wrong for me to speak of it. It is not my role to predict probabilities in the great epicycles of chaos which are the futures. I can say without doubt that the next few days and weeks will determine whether this amazing biosphere shall survive or not. Our own actions will, to a great extent, determine this. But there is no single correct course of action. And if I may ask a question, there are friends of mine here new to the Star Tree and to outer space. It would help in our discussion if one of our hosts were to explain the background of the Auster race, of the biosphere and other projects, and of the Auster and Templar philosophy. Auster Sian Quintana Kaan. I would be pleased to speak to our new guests, friend Aeneas. It is important that all present in these deliberations understand our stake in the outcome. As all of our Auster and Templar brethren here well know, the Auster race was created more than 800 years ago in scores of star systems, far flung from one another. Human seed ships with colonists trained in the genetic arts were sent out from Old Earth system in the great pre-Hejra expansions. These seed ships were, for the most part, slower than light craft. Fleets of crude bussard ramjets, solar sailing ships, ion scoops, nuclear pulse propulsion craft, gravity-launched Dyson spherelets, laser-driven containment sailing ships, only a few dozen of the later seed ships being early Hawking Drive C+ craft. These colonists, our ancestors, most traveling in cold sleep deeper than cryogenic fugue, were among the best arnists, nanotechs, and genetic engineers Old Earth system had to offer. Their missions were to find habitable worlds and, in the absence of terraforming technology, to bioengineer and nanotech the millions of Old Earth life forms frozen aboard their ships into viable adaptations for those worlds.
As we know, a few of the seed ships had reached habitable worlds. New Earth, Tau Ceti, Barnard's world. Most, however, reached worlds in systems where no life forms could survive. The colonists had a choice. They could continue on, hoping that their ship's life support systems would sustain them for more long decades or centuries of travel, or they could use their gene engineering skills to adapt themselves and their Ark's embryos to conditions far harsher than the original seed ship planters had imagined. And so they did. Using the most advanced methods of nanotechnology, methods quashed on old Earth and the early hegemony by the Technocore, these human beings adapted themselves to wildly inhospitable worlds and to the even less hospitable black spaces between worlds and stars. Within centuries, the use of Hawking Drive had spread to most of these far-flung swarms of ouster colonists, but their urge to find friendlier worlds had faded. What they now wanted was to continue to adapt, to allow all of old Earth's orphans to adapt, to whatever conditions the place and space offered them. And with this new mission grew their philosophy, our philosophy, almost religious in fervor, of spreading life throughout the galaxy, throughout the universe. Not just human life, not just old Earth life forms, but life in all of its infinite and complex variations. A few of our visitors here tonight may not know that the end goal of both us Ousters and our Templar brethren is not just the biosphere star tree, which we can see above us even as we speak, but a day in which air and water and life shall fill almost all of the space between the star tree and the yellow sun we see burning above us. The Brotherhood of the Muir and our loose confederations of ousters want nothing less than to turn the surface, seas, and atmosphere of every world around every green star gee willikers. The Brotherhood of the Muir and our loose confederations of ousters want nothing less than to turn the surface, seas, and atmosphere of every world around every star green with life. More than that, we work to see the galaxy grow green, tendrils reaching to nearby galaxies, superstrings of life. One byproduct of this philosophy, and the reason that the Church and the Pax seek to destroy us, is that for centuries we have been tailoring human evolution to fit the demands of the environment. The environment gives us. So far, there are no distinct and separate species of humankind different than Homo sapiens. That is, all of us here could, if both parties were willing, interbreed with any Pax human or Templar human. But the differences are growing, the genetic separation widening. Already there are forms of ouster humanity so different that we border on new human species, and those differences are passed along genetically to our offspring. This the Church cannot abide. And so we are engaged in this terrible war, deciding whether humankind must remain one species forever, or whether our celebration of diversity in the universe can be allowed to continue. Ania, thank you, free woman Sian Quintana Ka'an. I am sure that this has been helpful for my friends who are new to ouster space, as well as important for the rest of us to remember as we make these momentous decisions. Does anyone else wish to speak? Dalai Lama. Friend Ania, I have a comment and a question of you. The Pax's promise of immortality seduced even me into considering, for a few moments only, converting to their Christian faith. All here love life. It is the bright thread of our commonality. Can you tell us why the cruciform is bad for us? And I must say, the fact that it is a symbiote or parasite does not make it that unthinkable to me or many others. Our bodies have many life forms, the bacteria in our gut, for instance, which feed off us yet allow us to live. Friend Ania, what is the cruciform, and why should we shun it? Ania closes her eyes for only a second, sighs, and opens them to face the boy. Your Holiness, the cruciform was born out of the Technocorps' desperation following Mina Gladstone's attack on them in the hours before the fall of the Farcasters. The Technocorps, as I have discussed with all of you in different forums, lives and thinks only as a parasite. In that sense, humankind has long been a symbiotic partner of the Corps. Our technology was created and limited by Corps designs. Our societies have been created, altered, and destroyed by Corps plans and Corps fears. Our existence as human beings has largely been defined by the endless dance of fear and parasitism with the Corps AI entities. After the fall, after the Corps lost control of the hegemony via its dataspheres and Farcasters, after the Corps lost its greatest computing engine, its direct parasitism on the billions of human brains as they transited the void which binds via the so-called Farcasters, the Technocorps had to find a new way to exploit humankind, and it had to find it quickly. Thus, the cruciform. This is nanotechnology at its most refined and most injurious. Where our ouster friends use advanced genetic engineering combined with nanotechnology to advance the cause of life in the universe, the Technocorps uses it to advance the cause of Corps hyperparasitism. Each cruciform is made up of billions of Corps-enhanced nanotech entities, each in contact with other cruciforms, and the Corps via a terrible misuse of the void which binds medium. The Technocorps has known of the void for a millennium and misused it, for almost as long. The so-called Hawking Drive tore holes in the void. Then Farcasters ripped at the essential fabric of the void. The Corps-driven information metasphere and instantaneous fatline medium stole information from the void which binds in ways that blinded entire races, destroyed millennia of memories. But it is the cruciform that is the Corps' most cynical and terrible misuse of the void medium. What makes the cruciform seem most miraculous to most of us is not its ability to restore some form of life. Technology has offered variations of that for centuries, but the ability to restore the personality and memories of the deceased person. When one realizes that this demands information storage capabilities in excess of 6 times 10 to the 10 to When one realizes that this demands information storage capabilities in excess of 6 times 10 to the 23rd bytes for each human resurrected, the fact of cruciform seems truly miraculous. Those in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church who know the Corps' secret role in all resurrections ascribe this staggering, impossible, computing power to the Corps' megasphere storage potential. But the Corps has nowhere near that computing power. Indeed, even in the heyday of the Ultimate's attempt to create the perfect artificial computing entity, the ultimate intelligence, the analyzer of all variables, no AI or series of AIs in the Corps had the ability to store sufficient bytes for even one human body/personality to be recorded and resurrected. In fact, even if the Corps had such information storage capability, it would never have the energy necessary to reform atoms and molecules into the precise living entity that is the body of a human being, much less reproduce the intricate waveform dance that is a human personality. Resurrection of a single person was and remains impossible for the Corps. That is, it was impossible unless they further ravaged the void which binds. That transtemporal, interstellar medium for the memory and emotions of all sentient races, which the Corps did without a backward glance. It is the void which binds that records the individual wavefront personalities of those humans wearing cruciforms. The cruciform itself is little more than a Corps-spawned nanotech data transfer device. But every time a person is resurrected, parts of thousands of personalities, human and otherwise, are erased from the more permanent record that is the void which binds. Those of you who have taken communion with me, who have learned the language of the dead and of the living, who have attempted to hear the music of the spheres and have pondered the potential of taking that first step through the void which binds, you understand the terrible savagery this vandalism represents. It must stop. I must stop it.
Ania closes her eyes for a long moment, then opens them again and continues.
But this is not the only evil of the cruciform. I say again, the core AI entities are parasites. They cannot stop themselves from being parasites. Besides providing control of humanity via the church, and, if all else fails, by administering pain to individuals via the cruciforms, there is another reason the AIs have offered humanity resurrection via these cruciform parasites. With the fall of the Farcasters, the use of trillions of human neurons in the core's ultimate datasphere-connected ultimate intelligence effort was interrupted. Without the ruse of the Farcasters by which to attach themselves like leeches on human brains, to steal the very life energy of neurons and holistic wavefronts from their human hosts, to hook billions of human minds into parallel computing devices, the Ultimate Intelligence Project had to stop. With the cruciforms, this parasitism on the human brain has been resumed. But it is now more complex than mere data space connections of billions of human minds in parallel for the core's purposes. Centuries ago, as far back as the 20th century AD, human researchers dealing with similar neural networks comprised of pre-AI silicon intelligences discovered that the best way to make a neural network creative was to kill it. In those dying seconds, even in the last nanoseconds of a sentient or near-sentient conscience's existence, the linear, essentially binary processes of neural net computing jumped barriers, became wildly creative in the near-death liberation from off-on, binary-based processing. Wargame computer simulations as far back as the late 20th century showed that dying neural nets made unexpected but highly creative decisions. A primitive, pre-sentient AI controlling a battered seagoing fleet in a simulated wargame, for instance, suddenly sank its own damaged ships so that the remnants of its fleet could escape. Such was the genius of dying, non-linear neural net creativity. The core has always lacked such creativity. Essentially, it has the linear serial architecture of the serial CPUs from which it evolved, coupled with the obsessive, non-creative mentality of the ultimate parasite. But with the cruciform, the great neural networked core computing device which is the Christian cruciformed part of the human race... Okay, I just misunderstood what I was reading. Don't worry about me. But with the cruciform, that great neural networked core computing device which is the Christian cruciformed part of the human race, has found a source for almost unlimited creativity. All they need for a creativity catalyst is the death of large parts of the neural net. And humans provide that in abundance. The core AIs hover like vampires, waiting to feed off the dying human brains, sucking the marrow of creativity from humankind's mental bones. And when the deaths fall below the needed level, or when their core computing demand for creative solutions rises, they orchestrate a few million more deaths. Odd accidents occur. Humans' health is not what it was a few centuries ago. Death from cancer, heart disease, and the like are on the rise. And there are more clever forms of arranged mortality. Even with the Pact's imposition of peace within the human interstellar empire, the incidents of violent death are on the rise. New forms of death are introduced. The Archangel starships are such a beginning. Death is a cheap commodity for the born-again Christian, but it is a source of rich source of orchestrated creativity for the core, and thus the cruciform, and thus, I believe, at least one reason to eliminate the things from the human body and the human soul. When Ania quits speaking, there is a long silence. Leaves on the tree ship whisper in the breeze of circulating air. None of the None of the hundreds of humans or hominids on the many platforms, branches, bridges, or stairways seem to blink, so intense are their gazes as they stare at my friend. Finally, a single strong voice speaks. Father Captain de Soya, I still wear the collar and carry the vows of a Catholic priest. Is there no hope for my church? Not the church of the Pax, held under the technocore control and the conceit of greedy men and women, but the church of Jesus Christ and the hundreds of millions who followed his word.
Aeneas, Federico, Father de Soya, it is for you to answer this question, you and the faithful like you. But I can tell you that there are billions of men and women today, some who wear the cruciform, more who do not, who yearn to return to a church which concerns itself with spiritual matters, with the teachings of Christ and the deepest matters of the heart, rather than with this obsession with false resurrection.
Templar Het Mastine, revered one who teaches, if I may change the subject from the cosmic and theological to the most personal and petty.
Aeneas, nothing of which you speak could be petty, true voice of the tree, Het Mastine.
Templar Het Mastine, I was on the Hyperion pilgrimage with your mother, revered one who teaches. Oh, is that a comma or a period? No, it's a period, but it could be wrong. I was on the Hyperion pilgrimage with your mother, reverend one who teaches.
Aeneas, she spoke to me of you often, true voice of the tree, Het Mastine.
I think it's supposed to have been a comma. It doesn't matter. It's too late now. Templar Het Mastine, then you know that the Lord of Pain, the Shrike, came to me as the pilgrims were crossing Hyperion Sea of Grass on the wind wagon, one who teaches. It came to me and carried me forward in time and across space, to this time, to this place.
Aeneas, yes.
Templar Het Mastine, and in my conversations with you and with my brethren in the Brotherhood of the Muir, I have come to understand that it is my fate to serve the Muir and the cause of life in this age, as it was prophesied centuries ago by our own seers into the void which binds. But in these days, and despite the best efforts of my brothers and other kind friends among the ousters, I have heard of Martin Silenus's epic poem and found an edition of the cantos.
Aeneas, that is unfortunate, true voice of the tree, Het Mastine. My uncle Martin wrote that to the best of his knowledge, but his knowledge was incomplete.
Templar Het Mastine, but in the cantos, revered one who teaches, it says that the pilgrims in their day, and my friend Colonel Cassad, has confirmed that this was the case, that they find me on Hyperion in the Valley of the Time Tombs, and that I die shortly after they find me.
Aeneas, this is true in the context of the cantos, but...
Templar Het Mastine, holding up one hand to silence my friend, it is not the inevitability of my return through time to the pilgrimage on Hyperion, nor my inevitable death that worries me, revered one who teaches. I understand that this is just one possible future for me, however probable or desirable. But what I wish to clarify is the truth of my last words according to the old poet's cantos. Is it true that immediately before dying I will cry out, I am the true chosen. I must guide the tree of pain during the time of atonement?
Aeneas, this is what is written in the cantos, true voice of the tree, Het Mastine.
Templar Het Mastine, smiling under his hood, and this time is near, revered one who teaches. Will you be using this Yggdrasil as the tree of pain for our atonement, as the prophecies attest?
Aeneas, I will, true voice of the tree, Het Mastine. I will be leaving to carry out that atonement within standard days. I formally ask that the Yggdrasil be the instrument of our voyage, and the instrument of the atonement. I will be inviting many among us here tonight to join me on that final voyage. And I formally ask you, true voice of the tree, Het Mastine, if you will captain the tree ship Yggdrasil, forever after known as the Tree of Pain,
on this voyage.
Templar Hetmastine, I formally accept your invitations and agreed to captain the tree ship Yggdrasil on this mission of atonement, O revered one who teaches. There were several minutes of silence. Foreman Jigme Norbu. Oh, thank you for tuning in, Comp Hub Co. It is my pleasure. Foreman Jigme Norbu.
You've taught us about the Technocore's quiet genocide on such worlds as Hebron, Comriad, and others. Well, not genocide exactly, but because the populations have been put in a sort of sleep and death, but a terrible kidnapping.
Ania.
Yes.
Foreman Jigme Norbu.
Has this happened to our beloved T'ien Shan, the mountains of heaven, since we left Ania? Have our friends and families been silenced with this core death wand and been carried away to some labyrinthine world?
Ania.
Yes, Jigme, I am sad to say that it has happened. The bodies are being transported off-world even as we speak.
Kukusei. Why? For what reason are these populations being kidnapped? The Jews, the Muslims, the Hindus, the atheists, the Marxists, and now our beautiful Buddhist world. Is the Pax intent on destroying all other faiths?
Ania. That is the Pax and Church's motivation, Cuckoo. For the Technocore, it is a much more complicated matter. Without the cruciform parasite on these non-Christian populations, the Core cannot use these humans in its dying neural net. But by storing these billions of people in their false death, the Core can utilize their minds in its huge parallel processing neural network. It is a mutually beneficial deal. The Church, who carries out much of the removal work, is no longer threatened by non-believers. The Core, who brings the sleep death and carries out the storage in the labyrinths, gains new circuits in its ultimate intelligence network.
Foreman George Sarong.
Is there no hope, then? Can we do nothing to help our friends?
Ouster Navsun Hamnim.
Excuse me for interrupting, Sarong, Ania, but we should explain to our friends that when the time comes for our ouster swarms and Templar allies to take the offensive against the Pax, our first objective is to liberate the many labyrinthine worlds where these populations are kept in silent storage and to attempt to revive them.
The Dorje Famo, loudly.
Revive them? How is this to happen? How can anyone revive them?
Ania, by striking directly at the Technocore.
Lomo Dondrub. And where is the Technocore, Ania? Tell me, and I will go there now and do battle with these AI cowards.
Ania, the true location of the Technocore has been the AI's best-kept secret since the entities left Old Earth 1,000 standard years ago, Lomo. Their actual physical location has been hidden since... Oh, gosh, I can't read. Their actual physical location has been hidden there Their actual physical location has been hidden since then. Their secrecy is their best defense against the hosts which might turn against their parasites.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. CEO Mina Gladstone was convinced that the core dwelt in the interstices of the Farcaster medium, like invisible spiders in an unseen web. It is the reason she authorized the death bombing of the space portal Farcaster network to strike at the core. Was she wrong? Were the Farcasters destroyed for nothing?
Ania, she was wrong, Fedman. The physical location of the core was not within the Farcaster medium, which is the fabric of the void which binds. But the destruction of the Farcasters was not in vain. It deprived the core of the parasite medium upon which they fed on human minds, while silencing part of their megasphere data network.
Lomo Dondrub. But Ania, you know where the core resides?
Ania, I believe I do.
Lomo Dondrub. Will you tell us so that we can attack them with our teeth and nails and bullets and plasma weapons?
Ania, I will not say at this time, Lomo, not until I am certain. And the core cannot be attacked with physical weapons, just as it cannot be entered by physical entities.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. So once again they are impervious to our attacks, free from confrontation?
Aeneas. No, neither impervious nor free from confrontation. If the fates allow, I will personally carry the attack to the physical core. Indeed, that attack has already begun in ways that I hope to make clear later. And I promise you that I will confront the AIs in their lair.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. Aeneas, bronze child, may I ask another question relating to my own fate and future?
Aeneas. I will endeavor to answer, Colonel, while repeating my reluctance to discuss specifics of a topic as fluid as our future.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. Reluctant or no, child, I believe I deserve an answer to this question. I, too, have read these damned cantos. In them it says that I followed the apparition Moneta into the future while fighting the Shrike, trying to prevent it from slaughtering the other pilgrims. This was true. Some months ago I arrived here. Moneta disappeared, but has reappeared in the younger version of this woman who calls herself Rachel Weintraub. But the cantos also state that I will soon join in terrible battle with legions of Shrikes, will die, and will be entombed in the newly built time tomb called the Crystal Monolith on Hyperion, where my body travels back in time with Moneta as my companion. How can this be, Aeneas? Have I come to the wrong time, the wrong place?
Aeneas. Colonel Kassad, friend and protector of my mother and the other pilgrims, be assured that all proceeds according to whatever plan there is. Uncle Martin wrote the cantos given what revelation there was granted to him. Not all the details of your life, or mine, were available to him. Indeed, he has told precious little of what was to transpire outside of his presence. I can say this to you, Colonel Kassad. The battle with the Shrike is true, however metaphorically rendered. One possible future is for you to die in battle with the Shrike, with many Shrike-like warriors, and to be placed in the crystal monolith after a hero's funeral. But if this were to come to pass, it would be after many years and many other battles. There is work for you to do in the days, months, years, and decades to come. I ask you now to accompany me on the Yggdrasil when I depart in 3 days. That will be the first step toward these battles.
Colonel Fedman Kassad, smiling. But you deflect the question somewhat, Aeneas. May I ask you, will the Shrike be on your tree of pain when it leaves in 3 standard days' time?
Aeneas. I believe it will, Colonel Kassad.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. You have not told us here tonight, Aeneas, what the Shrike is, where it truly comes from, what its role in the centuries-old and centuries-to-come game is.
Aeneas. That is correct, Colonel. I have not told anyone here tonight.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. Have you ever told anyone, child?
Aeneas. No.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. But you know the origin of the Shrike?
Aeneas. Yes.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. Will you tell us, Braun Lamia's child?
Aeneas. I would prefer not to, Colonel.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. But you will, if asked again, will you not? At least you will answer my direct questions on the matter?
Aeneas nods silently. I see tears in her eyes.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. The Shrike first appears in that same far future in which I do battle with it as per the cantos. Is this not correct, Aeneas? That future in which the core is making its last-ditch stand against its enemies?
Aeneas. Yes.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. And the Shrike will be, a construct, is it not? A created thing. A core-created thing.
Aeneas. This is accurate.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. It will be a strange amalgam of core technological wizardry, void which binds energy, and the hybrid recycled personality of a real human being. Won't it, Ania?
Ania. Yes, Colonel. It will be all those things and more.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. And the Shrike will be created by the core, but it will become a servant and avatar of other powers, entities, will it not?
Ania. Yes.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. In truth, Ania, would you agree that the Shrike will be a pawn of both sides, of all sides, in this war for the soul of humankind? This war that leaps back and forth across time like a four-dimensional chess game.
Ania. Yes, Colonel, although not a pawn. A knight, perhaps.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. All right, a knight. And this hybrid, void which binds connected, Arneed, DNA-engineered, nanotech-enhanced, terribly mutated knight. It starts with the personality of a single warrior, does it not? Perhaps an opponent in this 1,000-year game.
Ania. Do you need to know this, Colonel? There is no greater hell than seeing the precise details of one's...
Colonel Fedman Kassad, softly, of one's future, of one's own death, of one's fate. I know that, Ania, daughter of my friend Braun Lamia. I know that you have carried such terrible certitudes and visions with you since before you were born, since the days when your mother and I crossed the seas and mountains of Hyperion toward what we thought was our fate with the Shrike. I know that it has been very difficult for you, Ania, my young friend, harder than any of us here could imagine. None of us could have borne up under such a burden. But I still want to know this part of my own fate, and I believe that my years of service in the cause of this battle, years past and years yet to be given, have earned me the right to an answer. Is this Shrike based on a single human warrior's personality?
Ania. Yes.
Colonel Fedman Kassad. Mine? After my death in battle, the core elements, or some power, will incorporate my will, my soul, my persona into that monster, and send it back in time through the crystal monolith?
Ania. Yes, Colonel. Parts of your persona, but only parts of it, will be incorporated into the living construct called the Shrike.
Colonel Fedman Kassad, laughing. But I can also live to beat it in battle? Ania.
Yes.
Colonel Fedman Kassad, laughing harder now, the laughter sounding sincere and unforced. By God, by the will of Allah, if the universe has any soul, it is the soul of irony. I kill mine enemy, I eat his heart, and the enemy becomes me, and I become him. There are several more minutes of silence. I see that the tree ship Yggdrasil has turned around, and that we are approaching the great curve of the biosphere star tree again.
Rachel Weintraub. Friend Ania, beloved teacher, in the years I have listened to you teach and learned from you, one great mystery has haunted me.
Ania.
What is that, Rachel?
Rachel Weintraub.
Through the void which binds, you have heard the voices of the others, the sentient races beyond our space and time, whose memories and personalities resonate in the void medium. Through communion with your blood, some of us have learned to hear the whispers and echoes of those voices. Through communion with your blood, some of us have learned to hear the whispers of the echoes of those voices, of the lions and tigers and bears, as some call them.
Ania.
You are one of my best students, Rachel. You will someday hear these voices clearly, just as you will learn to hear the music of the spheres and to take that first step.
Rachel Weintraub, shaking her head.
That is not my question, friend Ania. The mystery to me has been the presence in human space of an observer or observers sent by those others, those lions and tigers and bears, to study humankind and report back to these distant races. Is the presence of this observer, or these observers, a literal fact?
Ania.
It is.
Rachel Weintraub.
And they were able to take on the form of human or ouster or Templar?
Ania.
The observer or observers are not shapeshifters, Rachel. They chose to come among us in some sort of mortal form, that is true, much as my father was mortal, but cybrid born.
Rachel Weintraub.
And this observer or these observers have been watching us for centuries?
Ania.
Yes.
Rachel Weintraub.
Is that observer, or one of these observers, with us today, here, on this tree ship, or at this table?
Ania. Hesitates.
Rachel, it is best that I say nothing more at this time. There are those who would kill such an observer in an instant to protect the packs or to defend what they think it means to be human. Even saying that such an observer exists puts that entity at great risk. I am sorry. I promise you that this mystery will be solved in the not-too-distant future, and the observer or observer's identity revealed. Not by me, but by the observer or observers themselves.
Templar True Voice of the Star Tree, Cat Rostine.
Brothers in the Muir, respected ouster allies, honored human guests, beloved sentient friends, revered one who teaches, we shall finish this discussion at another time and another place. I take it as a consensus of those among us that Emmania's request for the tree-ship Yggdrasil to depart for Pax space in 3 standard days is agreed to, and that, with luck and courage, thus shall be fulfilled the ancient Templar prophecies of the Tree of Pain and the time of atonement for all children of old earth. Now we will finish our meal and speak of other things. This formal meeting is adjourned, and what remains of our short voyage must be friendly conversation, good food, and the sacrament of real coffee grown from beans harvested on old earth, our common home, the good earth. This meeting is adjourned. I have spoken.
Later that evening, in the warm light of our private cubby, Ania and I made love, spoke of personal things, and had a late second supper of wine and zygote cheese and fresh bread. Ania had gone off to the kitchen cubby for a moment and returned with 2 crystal bulbs of wine. Offering me one, she said,
Here, Raul, my beloved, take this and drink.
Thanks, I said, without thinking, and started to raise the bulb to my lips. Then I froze. Did you...
Yes, said Ania. It is the communion that I have delayed so long for you. Now it is yours if you choose to drink. But you do not have to do this, my love. It will not change the way I feel about you if you choose not to.
Still looking into her eyes, I drained the wine in the bulb. It tasted only of wine. Ania was weeping. She turned her head away, but I had already seen the tears in her lovely dark eyes. I swept her up in my arms, and we floated together in the warm womb light.
Kiddo, I whispered, what's wrong?
My heart ached as I wondered if she was thinking of the other man in her past, her marriage, the child. The wine had made me dizzy and a bit sick. Or perhaps it was not the wine. She shook her head.
I love you, Raul. I love you, Ania. She kissed my neck and clung to me. For what you have just done, for me, in my name, you will be hunted and persecuted. I forced a chuckle. Hey, kiddo, I've been hunted and persecuted since the day we rode the hawking mat out of the Valley of the Time Tombs together. Nothing new there. I'd miss it if the packs quit chasing us. She did not smile. I felt her tears against my throat and chest as she clung more tightly. You will be the first among all those who follow me, Raul. You will be the leader in the decades and decades of struggle to come. You will be respected and hated, obeyed and despised. They will want to make a god of you, my darling. Bullshit, I whispered into my friend's hair. You know I'm no leader, kiddo. I haven't done anything except follow in all the years we've known each other. Hell, I spent most of my time just trying to catch up. Ania raised her face to mine. You were my chosen one before I was born, Raul Endymion. When I fall, you will continue on for us. Both of us must live on through you. I put my heavy finger against her lips. I kissed the tears from her cheeks and lashes. No talking of falling or living without the other, I commanded her. My plan is simple, to stay with you forever, through everything, to share everything. What happens to you happens to me, kiddo. I love you, Ania. We floated in the warm air together. I was cradling her in my arms. Yes, whispered my friend, hugging me fiercely. I love you, Raul. Together. Time. Yes. We quit talking then. I tasted wine and the salt from her tears in our kisses. We made love for more hours, then drifted off to sleep together, each floating entwined in the other's embrace, like two sea creatures, like one wonderfully complex sea creature, drifting on a warm and friendly tide.
And that is where we will call it for today. As I shuffle things around a bit. No technical issues today. I'll take that as a win. Yeah. So things are moving along. We had some pretty heavy revelations in general. Fedman Kassad is kind of the Shrike, kind of. Things are wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey, even more than we thought. Although they've been sort of leading you to this point and had enough implications that you kind of could have put some of this stuff together. Although I'll admit, Fedman Kassad being the Shrike is, or part of him being the Shrike, is kind of a bit of a wild card, to be honest. I guess next time we get to find out some of what it's like to have communionated with Ania's blood. What does that entail? Anything? Is it real? I guess Raul will have to find out, as will we. So yeah, day after tomorrow should be our next one. So feel free to tune in for that. As soon as I know my schedule for the week after that, I'll tell people on the Discord. But until then, I have no clue. I am not the one who teaches. I am the one who reads. Yes, he's giving himself grandiose titles. Abandon ship, run! Anyway, folks, thanks again for tuning in. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. See you all next time. Toodaloo, etc.